Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a two-game slate for college football tonight. This is going to be Virginia versus Georgia Tech and Troy versus South Alabama. We have a couple injuries to note here. For Troy, one, Barber is out. He's a wide receiver, so Rajay Johnson should get some upside there. And then another receiver, Lewis, is questionable. And then for Georgia Tech, their starting quarterback, Sims, is questionable. And one of their other players, Carter, is questionable. He's a wide receiver as well. So we have a couple wide receivers that potentially could be out, and the quarterback that could be out. And so that will potentially make a difference here today. Virginia and Georgia Tech, they have a 46.5 point up over under, and Georgia Tech is favored by 3 points. The Troy South Alabama game is nearly identical at 47 point over under, and South Alabama is favored by 3 points. So with that said, let's get into the players themselves. So today we do have some good options available. So at quarterback, we have three really good options, which are Carter Bradley, Brennan Armstrong, and Gunnar Watson. Now Sims is questionable for Georgia Tech, but Georgia Tech throws the ball the least, and whether he plays or if it's a backup, I really don't like their quarterbacks too much on this particular slate. So let's go and get through the first three quarterbacks, the top three guys though. Carter Bradley, he's had a pretty good season so far. You can see he's a little bit up and down. He's had some, sub 20 fantasy point games, but he's had some big ones as well. And in this particular situation, he's going to have to throw the ball to do well in this one. And so that's the type of game that I expect him to have. He also has thrown more than double the amount of touchdowns of everybody else on the slate, with 13 touchdowns. And I suspect that he will have several today. They have some good wide receivers, and I really like them overall. Brennan Armstrong's another guy I like pretty good. He's got 5 touchdowns on the season with 1,360 yards. He has thrown some interceptions, but he does have some good wide receivers to throw the ball to here. And his price is pretty good. Him and Gunnar Watson are pretty even on price point. So now the advantage that Brennan Armstrong has is that he also does run the ball some. He's got 68 rushes on the season, so he's averaging about 10 rushes a game, 195 yards and 3 touchdowns. So there's some potential there as well, which obviously that helps him from the potential aspect here. Obviously he's been a little bit more robust some games, but he's still in a good spot. And then we have Gunnar Watson, who has thrown just as many touchdowns and interceptions and about the same amount of yards as Armstrong as well. He's a little bit safer, but his upside is a little bit lower, and his floor is higher, but it's not that much higher. Overall, I do think Brennan Armstrong is better, also because he gets yards on the ground, which is one thing Gunnar Watson doesn't get. And if you look at the way that this build works, you need to have somebody in this S-flex position, and it can be a quarterback. And so I definitely look at Brennan Armstrong as a great option to put in that position S-flex because of his potential on the ground and just overall quarterbacking ability. I tend to like quarterbacks there, so my kind of cheat code today is putting Bradley at the starting quarterback and Armstrong at the S-flex. With that said, let's get into the running backs. So we have really 5 good options here. The first being Hassan Hall. He's been really good in the last 3 games, has a lot of upside here. He's second lowest in total rushes on the season on the 5 running backs I do like. Really, there's 4 because the 5th one is injury dependent. But he is the lowest in total yards and stuff like that, and he hasn't actually had a touchdown this season. But he does have upside because he's in pretty good, and he gets a couple receptions through the air some, which does help his fantasy points. So I look for him to be a decent option here. Then we're going to look at Vidal for Troy. Now, he has the third most touches this season. He also has 2 touchdowns, 308 yards. He also gets some receptions to the air, and he has some pretty good upside in this matchup, and his price isn't too bad at $5,700. I do like Troy running the ball in this particular matchup as well. Then we're going to look at LaDamian Webb. Now, this is where it gets a little silly. His price is extremely high, but in the last game, he got hurt after the first play. And so, while it does look like he is going to play, and he's had a really good season, you do have to be a little bit concerned about that. But overall, he is expected to play, so I don't have too many reservations. But if he doesn't play, or if you want to take a risk and think that he might be a little bit more limited, then you could go to Marco Lee, who took over for him last week and had a really good week overall, including scoring several touchdowns. He's even done okay in a couple other games, but he really doesn't get too many touches usually. But overall, if you wanted to like transaction off of Webb because you thought he might not play, I don't really see any expectation for Webb to not play, but you could potentially go there. Then the final guy here is Billingsley for Troy. Now he's a little bit cheaper, but he's nearly the same amount of rushing attempts and touchdowns and yards as there are as Beadall for them as well. His price is surprisingly low. Now, granted, he doesn't get a ton of fantasy points, as you can see. He's not been as high on the fantasy points as some guys you would like, but his price makes him interesting here and will allow you to pay up for some other position players. So in the wide receiver aspects, we have several good options, quite a few actually. So first of all, we'll just go team to team here. So first of all, we're going to look at the wide receiving options for the for Virginia. Now, there's really two guys here to like. What is this doing? Why is this messing up? Oh, might help if I put it at the top here. Alright, so Thompson so far for Virginia. He's one of the best options here. He's been pretty consistent this season. His floor is pretty good. His price is not overpriced, and I do like him on this slate. Also, Wicks here. He's in a very similar position. His floor is a little bit lower, but overall, he's been pretty consistent, and I think he's a pretty decent play on this particular slate. Then we're going to look at Georgia Tech, and there's really only one guy here that I really like, and that is McCollum. He's been pretty solid this season. He's been a little bit inconsistent, but he does have a little bit of a boomer bust situation. But overall, I like him, and I think he's in a great spot here for Georgia Tech. I really didn't like Blackburn because he's really only done all of his damage in one game, and he isn't really expected to play, I don't think, very much. Then we're going to look at Troy, and we have three guys here. Tez Johnson. He's been extremely consistent this season, having really good games ever since at least the last 4 games. The first 2 games he wasn't quite as good. Of course, those were against good teams. So I do look for him to have a really good game in this one. Deshaun Stoudemire, he's another guy I like here. He's been a little bit up and down, but he does have some upside in this matchup. There's a little bit of risk involved because he doesn't really get touchdowns and stuff like that. And then Rajay Johnson. Now, he's the guy that's going to take over for one of the injured players that's definitely out. And as you can see, he's had some good games this season, so I expect him to have a potentially pretty good game, despite the fact he didn't play as much in the middle whenever the other guys were playing. So then at South Alabama, we have 3 guys to take a look at here. This is Colin Lacey first. He's been extremely consistent. I really like him on the slate. Price is pretty good. Jalen Wayne, another guy that's priced pretty good. A little bit higher. He's a little bit boomer bust, though, so you have to be a little bit concerned with that. But overall, I expect South Alabama to throw the ball a lot. That's one thing that their team does, so I wouldn't hate using him. Or Bosselin, who's been a little bit inconsistent, but also has boomer or bust potential as well. So overall, I think it's a really solid slate. I think you can put together some different lineups based on what you like the most. But overall, I think it's a really good slate. And even though it's only 2 games, it should be a lot of fun. It should be pretty good scoring. Troy's probably the best defensive team here, but overall, even that isn't going to be too terrible when it comes to through the air. So overall, I just like it overall. With that said, thank you guys for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day.